I mean, my first experience of visual was in the early 90s, early to mid 90s. Well, before that, but where it really sunk in was with Darren Bly over at Mount Pinus. This guy, I called him NGC Max because he always knew where everything was and he could pick things out, and he was a great observer. And he had a 17.5-inch Dob. So, I saw him 51 in there, and I went, wow, man, you can see all the spiral structure and everything. It was insane. So, and it carried him from there. And then when, my favorite comet was Hyakutake, but Hale-Bopp, because it was Pegasus Square, it was just like so well placed. Yep. And then when I shot a picture of, that was hypersensitized film, Lumicon film, 800 speed, and I think it was 1200. And I had a Los Monte GM8 mount and a wide angle lens. And at that time, there was a 1-hour photo lab down the street from my house. Took the film in. I couldn't wait to see what the results were. I was like, wow, I couldn't believe I took this picture. And you could see the ion tail and all it looked crazy, So that was exciting. But astrophotography gets kind of crazy. It's just where you come in.
Well, what's so funny is like, when we talk about visual, I can remember as a kid at 12 years old, being in Canada, and literally my parents getting me a Sears Roebuck.
Oh, yeah.
Little refractor.
A lot of people started that way.
Exactly. And I can remember getting up and looking at the celestial target, and that's when I got hooked on visual. And I knew visual, and I just said, this is what I...
And you're about how old at this time?
Oh, God, let's see, born in 54, so, you do the math, 66. But I think what it was is that what really led me to doing visual was watching The Outer Limits, and it was just the opening credits there where they say, we control the focus to a soft blur for the next 60 minutes.
Right.
We control what you see and what you hear.
The intro.
Yeah, and I'm sitting there going, that's what I like. And when they showed you that moon, I was just captivated with astronomy at the time. So it was interesting is that it's the bug that gets into you when you're just as a kid growing up.
Right, yeah.
And you find it. But as I said, that was back, many, many, many moons ago. But as you said, now with the advent of high-end optics, fast cameras, I mean...
It's changed a lot.
It's changed a lot.
It's very dynamic now.
Yeah. I mean, and so with visual and astrophotography, I mean, they do go hand in hand quite a bit.
Yeah.
What do you have a preference? Do you prefer to do visual or do you like to do AP work?
Yeah, no, I really do prefer visual, which is interesting, which is what I find interesting about you, is I want to hear the other side of the story, because what compels an imager to image, because that's mainly what you do, and I mainly do visual. Granted, I have to deal with astrophotographers pretty much all day anyway, so...
And same thing, as I sit there and I look at it, I'm kind of wondering, what is the capture that you like to do with visual as compared to not wanting to get into AP? So,
well, it's funny. I was talking to Bill P. from Cloudy Nights on the way here. We were having a phone conversation, and one of the things Bill said to me is that if you sit and read about something, and then you look at it, it makes you appreciate it, even a subtle thing. Mm-hmm. And so I think that most of it is just because of Robert Burnham Jr. Yeah. Burnham's Celestial Handbook is really the Sky Bible as to why I find visual so compelling, because the diversity of stuff and the way it was written and everything made it interesting. So when I saw it, I appreciated it. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that's what it is. So, and he even describes as far as going like, why, when things are faint and fuzzy, it's the idea of the knowing of what those faint things are, So.
It's funny, I got started, as I said, when I moved down here, I ended up getting in, I actually bought a Tech 140. Yeah. And I bought a couple of Telview eyepieces. I bought the Panoptic, I bought the 4135, the 24 millimeter. Yeah. And it was really what I got started in. And I like the AP work because, once again, everybody looks at M42, right? M42 and M45. And that kind of captivated me. But as you're saying is that after like about 2 or 3 times taken out doing visual, everything was just in monochrome. I mean, everything was just shades of gray. And I kind of thought, there's got to be more to it than just looking at this. I mean, the detail is spectacular. Don't get me wrong. It was just that there was just not enough pizzazz or the popping of the color that you see in these prints.
Right, and which is what is interesting about astrophotography. It's a totally different thing. I mean, you obviously get more colors, you get the details. Granted, you can play God with the colors, right? But I guess it is another way to see things. I mean, Edward Emerson Barnard, that Barnard Atlas is the one that I love. It's all black and white, but I mean, obviously, photography brings out details that you just don't see with the naked eye the same way, obviously. So, but I think it's a deeper thing that compels me. But, because I'm thinking about what it is, that's what's kind of captivating me. But it's fine. I mean, we have astrophotographers. It's cool. It's good. It's what we need in the industry to. It keeps the industry flowing. That's for sure.
You know, the thing that captures me about astrophotography is that I'm not an artist, but when you do photography, you being the artist behind the camera is capturing that image.
Right.
And per se, we look at it and we say, okay, this is what we think this color should look like. I mean, we look at HA being at 656.3 nanometers. We look at O3 as being 500.7 nanometers. But does anybody really know if that color is at that particular wavelength? Right. I mean, scientifically, yes. But the idea is that nobody's actually physically seeing it. So the idea is that now you can definitely play the artist. And what you're capturing is going to be your palette. And with the advent of narrowband filters, now, I mean, you can just become, you know, you can do some HOO, you can do SHO, you can do Hubble palette. There's just so much of this color spectrum that you can actually do with these different celestial targets.
It's funny that you mentioned color to me, because I look at planetary photographers, for example, and I look at their work, because I have tons of visual experience with the solar system, tons and tons and tons for many years. So I pay attention to colors, because I have really good color perception. And so it's interesting to see how people process images where you can tell, I wonder, looks like they may not have ever seen the planet visually that well or that for that long, because some of the way that the work is saturated or the colors are deep. But I think there's an element of artistry and astro-imaging that's so important. John Hawk was talking about this, and I think that's a lot of people lack that artistic skill to put into, you know, the processing, because they don't have the eye for it. I mean, obviously you do. I've looked at your work. It's world-class stuff.
Well, the interesting thing is that if you like challenges, definitely getting into astrophotography is a challenge, because it's a four-step process. You've got to definitely look at the equipment, get the equipment, have the different platforms talk to each other. Right. Then the second part is getting the data acquisition. Third part is definitely doing your calibration, registration, stacking. Right. And then the last part, which is the most critical part, is the post-processing. Right.
And do you consider yourself, not to interrupt, but do you consider yourself artistic? It would seem to me, based on the work I'm seeing, that you're artistic. I would imagine you have some degree of...
I don't know if I'm artistic, or I just like maybe to create, if that would be the consideration of what artistic is. But it's just the idea of, remember the old adage, raw data, you know, good data in, good data out. Right. I mean, we've all got bad data. When you're trying to salvage bad data, we all know that just is an effort of futility. But I think that really, when it comes down to AP, is that if you want a challenge, and unlike terrestrial photography, AP definitely is a challenge. There's no question about it. I mean, there's many times where you've gone out, you set everything up, and you'll be damned if you get the image that you're looking for. I mean, you're getting all your subs, and unfortunately, your subs, you'll probably throw out maybe half of them. And so you might be only left with, say, maybe a dozen to maybe 17, and you're going to try to say, okay, what can we do with these particular subs? Sometimes you can salvage something, sometimes you can't. But boy, when you do get that one image and you get enough subs, and you finally see, because when you start to look at it and you're doing your post-processing, the fact that the histogram is so far to the left, it's just a black. And most people will get frustrated. They're going to say, well, there's nothing here. There is data there. You just have to tease it out. So that's where post-processing comes in. Yeah. And of those four steps, I would honestly have to say that the weakness to the majority of the people out there is that fourth step, is they don't have the skill set for post-processing. Right. Case in point, you know, having to work with AstroPixel Processor, PixInsight, or for that matter, Photoshop. I mean, if you've got a wife, kid, family, you've got a job to go to, of course, how do you take the time to really get very proficient at the post-processing? Right. But it does take time. You have to put the effort into it.
So do you enjoy the technical challenges of it?
Absolutely.
You do.
And I would say to anybody that really wants to get into this hobby, is definitely, I would say, start doing visual. Right. Because starting with visual would definitely be a natural progression getting into AP. Yeah. And then possibly maybe that intermediary step would be to say, okay, let's start with the visual. And then if I want to definitely do astrophotography, maybe I get one of those little sky trackers. Yeah. I've already got the DSLR.
I've often suggested those as a good way to get your feet wet.
Because most people, I think that, you've seen it, and you've got people that call you all the time. They're going to say, hey, look, I want to do this, 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 and this. Right. But have you started to crawl before you're starting to run? You've got that.
That's hard. People, to get people to crawl. or just take it in steps. Everybody does a lot at one time. I was just going to tell you, I had the privilege, I was with Tom Bash, who was an imaging mentor to me back in the earlier days, who is good friends with Adam Block, who won the Hubble Award at the EIC conference, and I had the privilege to sit down with Adam Block, just a world-class imager, you know. And one of the things that I found was so intriguing about a lot of these advanced astro-imagers is the amount of data they collected but hadn't processed it yet. Like, yeah, I got data, I got to process it. So it just seems like that's like what they do. They get tons of data, they don't process it. It's so much time and work, right?
Yeah.
Into the post-processing. So I just thought that was interesting. When is technology like too much in your... Here's an example. The Gordon Murray car, the McLaren F1 car that Gordon Murray developed, right? It's the most prolific, supercar. Because all analog, everything is analog, there's no digital stuff. And so my understanding is that a lot of drivers actually like it as a driver's car because it has that. So I was mentioning that to Bill, and I said, who was a T-38 Talon pilot as well. And I said, what do you think about how technology has changed flying? And the same thing applies to astronomy, I think, because at what point does astronomy stop being astronomy if there's so much digital? Where is it, you know? I think I'm torn because the conversations back in the day before the availability of all these cameras that are, you know, all over the market now, was astronomers or visual observers would come in and talk about the things they saw, and we would discuss those things in a way. Whereas on an astrophotographer's level, there's more about the processing side or the technical things of it, where it's not really discussing anything really that is related to astronomy, unless you want to use photography for astronomy to... It's subjective, I guess, but it just seems like the conversations are mostly related to things that are outside of astronomy itself.
You know, you're right. I mean,
you're dealing with adapters.
We look at the advancements now, and it's almost to the point now where there's so much automation.
So I was going to say, it's all automated.
That it takes the human element
out of it.
Right. And I kind of miss that because you remember, like back in the 90s when we had to actually auto guide.
Yeah.
Do you remember the old process?
It was manual.
It was manual.
I remember I pulled up some old ads and I was looking at these old tracking device things, you know?
You know, and now you've got PhD2, you've got Star Aid that literally just automates that. I mean, from a technological aspect, for a newbie getting in, it really makes it easy. But if you're kind of old school, you may kind of miss wanting to do that. I agree with you. Is that you're right. These cameras now. I mean, you look at the CMOS technologies compared to the CCDs. There's a lot of the old school guard that still swears by the CCD mono. But I tell you what, you can't beat the CMOS technology cameras now, especially with these fast optics. I mean, we've got telescopes now that are f2.0, like the Rosses.
Right, super fast.
You know, we've got the Officina Stellaris, the Velocities that are f3.0. I mean, these are fast optics now. So literally within 3 or 4 hours during the summertime, when we actually have daylight savings time, you can get 50 subs within 3 hours. Even if you have to throw away 10 of them, you still got enough data to be able to put something together. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. It's like 6 of one, half dozen the other. We miss the hands-on stuff that we miss in the old days, but the technology is kind of really taking it to the next step.
Well, one of the things I loved, and I was mentioning this in another video that I admired so much about Robert Burnham Jr. and Edward Emerson Barnard, are the ones that I bring up, is because when you look at those atlases, which are worth several $1,000s, my friend has them, and I always take them out and look at the prints and everything because they're the originals. And but if you read his companion, Barnard was actually asking himself, "What is this stuff? What are these things I'm imaging?" And he was curious about it. And I think to me that's what was intriguing. Why I appreciated. They use it as a art or method to try and understand something. Whereas now we pretty much, we have a fairly good understanding of what the stuff is, and now we look at the pictures now, for the most part.
Well, you and I talked about this the other day. Remember we were talking about Edwin Hubble, looking at the glass plates, and the fact that you used to work up at Palomar, and you could see those original glass plates, and how they would actually take the time up there in the middle of the winter time, how he'd probably have his pipe, and he'd take that photographic plate, and then they'd have the girls go through each one of those plates to see if there's movement. I mean, you look at that as being the old way of doing things, as to now, we could take an image in 5 seconds.
That's what they could do, right?
Yeah.
But there was so much nostalgia with
It
when
is.
they did it, right?
It is old nostalgia.
But times change and things move on.
Well, it's kind of funny. I
That's
think
what
as we get a little older
that's
too, we kind of look back at that old nostalgia, don't we?
Yeah, we do. I certainly appreciate it.
Yeah.
And it was a tool to really discover things.
Yep.
But now, like you said, man, you can get with modest imaging gear. You know, what you can do is explosive. And now they're getting exoplanets with amateur.
I know, it's amazing.
Exoplanets. So it's made it accessible to many amateurs.
Exactly. And as you said, even looking at it one step further now, I mean, look at what we've got now with these remote pay for imaging, like eye telescopes, New Mexico skies. I mean, literally, you can be in the comfort of your own kitchen, pay to actually have usage of a telescope that's in a whole different state, 5, 6, 7, 1,000 miles away, and you can get the data now on your laptop.
You know, and I was saying this earlier, maybe it just doesn't, to some people, it doesn't, astronomy or knowing what planets are in order or knowing the distance of stars isn't necessarily what a person is interested in, and that's fine. They may enjoy the technical challenges of doing the processing, and some of that can be fun. You know, whatever rocks your boat.
Yep.
You know?
But as I think, as I said, even if you do visual, and chime in on this if you think, Dan, because I really think that it's kind of like learning how to drive a car, right?
Yep.
You have to put the key in, or at least, there's no keys anymore, right? It's a push button.
Push button.
You know, but nowadays.
Or you just push it and it starts up before you even get in it, right? Strange.
So it's kind of the same thing here, is that you start out with visual, but you have to have an idea when you're looking at the celestial sphere,
right.
What are the constellations? We know that there's 88 constellations, but in the northern hemisphere, you have to have an idea of what these constellations are. So you have to look at patterns. Right. You literally, as you said, you have to get a constellation book because you definitely do need to know what the names are, what the names of the prominent stars are.
Certainly.
And then basically be able to star hop. Yeah. I mean, this technology of having go-to is kind of nice, but I tell you what, let's just say you don't have a go-to scope.
Right.
How do you know what star is Arcturus, which is Capella, which is Navis? You don't know unless you take the time to actually hone and take the time to understand this hobby that you're getting into.
Plus, you have to plan what you're going to shoot, right? And you got to set everything up in a certain angle so it's going to be at that right position, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have to deal with meridian flips or whatever. Yeah, someone mentioned earlier about the North American Nebula, which is interesting because I have a lot of write-ups on the internet about this. And actually, the North American Nebula is a very prolific object that's often shot by photographers, particularly wide-field photographers. And ironically, it is one of the most stunning objects visually that a lot of people don't know this. And part of it, in my opinion, is because most of the large aperture telescopes have a narrower field of view. And some people are often shocked when I say if you have a UHC filter and you're viewing visually in, say, a 4-inch or preferably an 80 millimeter or 4-inch, usually no bigger, you can get that wide angle, put that filter in there and see that wide angle, and you'll see the nebula just shoot out at you if you're in a dark sky. It's stunning. I mean, I'm often stunned because it's Central America. I mean, it's stunning to my eyes. Which brings me to the next thing is that what we see visually, in my opinion, I think a lot of it depends on the person's talent. It's kind of like, you learn to play a guitar, you learn to drive a car or whatever, you learn to observe. And, it takes time to learn to observe. And some people may not have the patience for it. And I kind of see where photography has a place in that regard. As far as what you see visually, some, particularly women, have mentioned, seeing tones of green with Orion's Nebula. But I agree with you. Pretty much most of it, visually, it's a monochrome image. And the way the human eye works, you don't see much color in the dark anyway, because that's not the part of the eye that's functioning as much anyway. And so, therefore, it takes more to stimulate it. However, we've looked at planetary nebula in the 60-inch at Mount Wilson, which is one of, it's like 25,000 millimeter focal length. It's just killer on those objects because they're so condensed and bright. You literally see flowers, colors. I mean, Wayne Montanoga, one of my buddies that goes up there, he was literally sketching with markers the colors that he was seeing.
That's amazing.
And it's stunning, it's so killer on that kind of stuff. So I think planetary nebulas are one of the exceptions of, where you see some colors that are pretty beautiful, but I think for the most part, you're right. Most of it's just monochrome.
Well, and I agree is that when you're looking at the way now a lot of people are post-processing. Yeah. I personally, I don't have a preference for this oversaturated, over overcooked look, you know, when they used to do like the HDR. I mean, you've seen these HDR terrestrial photographs,
Yeah.
where the dynamic range is so overcooked.
Right.
And I look at that and I go, it just looks unnatural. But the majority of the people, I think they like that
It is. It's the
oversaturation.
fashion too.
Yeah.
Rob Gendler told me that. You know, I'd asked him about it, and he says it's kind of the trend of the way imaging is. You know.
I mean, my personal preference, I don't like it because I don't really feel that that's what it really looks like.
Right, but it's what they like.
Yeah, I'm thinking is maybe it does have color. It could be like a muted kind of a color, but it's not going to have that real garish over process. Like if we could get in a rocket ship and go up there and say, okay, this is what the NGC 7000 looks like, the North American Nebula.
Right.
Is this exactly what it does look like? I don't think it's going to look anything like what we see with these oversaturated photos.
Yeah.
But, you know, as I said, once again, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I mean, you are that artist. If that's what floats your boat and you really like that look, then all the best to you.
Right.
It's amazing. It's kind of like going to the Louvre. Some people like looking at great photographs, and some people like looking at that and going, well, that looks okay, but no, it's just not in my taste.
Right.
So it really kind of comes down to what your preference and taste is, I think.
Yeah, and people don't realize that a lot of the stuff that are shot in images is a vacuum.
Yeah.
There's just very little. It's mostly a vacuum.
It is a vacuum,
you know, compared to the atmosphere that we're breathing right now. I mean, it's no.
You're absolutely right. I mean, you know, look at the color. I mean, we can look out the window right here, and because of the fact that we got atmosphere here, and we're at what 14.7 pounds per square inch, there's a lot of refraction, a lot of water vapor that's just reflecting a lot of light. So you got a good point there. In a vacuum, would it be that garish? Would it be that contrast? Would it be that really saturated look? I don't think it would be.
Yeah, no, it'd be pretty invisible actually.
Yeah, it would be
for the most part.
At least to our eyes, anyway.
Yeah, you can actually see with the naked eye in a dark sky. You can see the Orion Nebula with your naked eye.
Yeah.
If you look carefully at it, you can tell there's some kind of cloudy feature there.
Yep.
But it is a vacuum as well, you know, in certain parts. So, for the most part.
And it's funny. It's just like if you look at even Alnitak, right? You know, you see the Horsehead and you see the Flame Nebula, but when you look at Alnitak, you just don't really see anything there because Alnitak is just so bright.
Yeah, it is.
But it's funny. Everybody thinks that it's Alnitak that is really illuminating the Horsehead, but it's not. It's Cygnus Orionis, which is above the Horsehead. That's really giving that Horsehead Nebula that real nice silhouette feature. So
and that's cool that you know that because that is some of the stuff that you read and you understand. It tends to make you appreciate. But that's kind of cool. Yep. I have to say though, you know more about some of the astrophysical stuff of parts of it than most astrophotographers would get into, that at least that I know. Well, I think you take it up another notch.
Well, I tell you, Dan, as I said, talking to you about visual, I mean, it's amazing is that there's so much that you've got to be able to go ahead and talk to the people that are visual. And you're right. When we get the phone calls, that's usually the first questions we ask. Are you doing visual or are you doing astrophotography?
Right. We need,
and
get you to the right person.
Get you the right person because,
totally.
we could go down a whole channel. All of a sudden the guy says, no, I want to get into astrophotography, so.
I think it's split 50-50. Bill P was asking me, what is it now? I think it's 50-50 roughly, as far as visual versus, most of the people that want to do some visual, they might consider dabbling into some photography at some point, but.
And I think a lot of people that really try to get into it, it's so much of a challenge that they just go, oh, no, I just want to do it because it's just too much of a challenge.
Right.
So as I said, they spend a lot of money, they get the camera gear, they get the filters, they get everything, and then they realize they're just going, well, I just don't have the time for post-processing.
Right.
So that's the one question that you always need to find out. Do you have the time? Because it's an investment. I mean, let's face it, it's a monetary investment, it's a time investment.
Yeah. And
it will definitely suck your time. I mean, if you don't have the time to get into it. So usually people that get into astrophotography are people who are retired. Mm-hmm. They've got their kids already moved out. It's just them and their wives. And even their wives now kind of enjoy going out with the husband to do this.
Right.
But you're right, there is definitely a time constraint that you have to do to understand and do AP work.
Well, and colors stimulate the mind, going back to, I know it's true, they want to see the colors.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Emission nebula, reflection nebula,
yep.
And there's some people, this is what fascinates me the most, is that there are some people who genuinely believe that you would see things visually, like what you see in photographs and Hubble images, literally. And yet, just want to do photography anyway. And I thought to myself, wow, well, if I could see everything visually the way people see on pictures, wouldn't that be fantastic? Wouldn't that be incredible? So it is weird. I think maybe some people enjoy the technical challenges of it, and maybe that's what it's about more so. But I think Hubble is a prolific scope, and it was necessary to get the public's attention, get those colors spiced up, to get people curious, and it was important. I think it's a great thing, but it doesn't look that way.
Well, as you said, you brought up a very good point, is that when you get the beginner coming in and he sees all the different images on there, is he thinking that with that particular scope, he's going to get that size image?
Right.
And I think that packaging is very unrealistic. I mean, we have to be realistic that,
Big pictures of Saturn,
exactly.
600 power.
Yeah, I know. It's almost like I can remember having the guy come in and come and say, I'll be honest with you, sir, that's just a marketing ploy. But you're right. There has to be a realistic tendency that they should maybe put another picture to say actual photographs. So
but if they do that, they won't sell.
Well, I know, that's just it.
No, I mean,
but that's just what it is that, it's kind of like that old adage, buy once, cry once. So you got to sit there and just say, okay, realistically, what is it that you want to do? Let's really look back here and let's draft up what it is that you want to do. Do you want to take the pretty pictures? Do you want to do scientific? I mean, you really need to do visual first, take that step, get familiar with your mount, get familiar with your equipment, then take that time and then get into a camera and really understand the nuances of your camera. I mean, understand what image scale is, determine what image scale is. There's a lot of formulas. I mean, formulas to determine what's my critical focus on. Right. People don't have a clue of this stuff.
Right. They don't know what they don't know.
No. I mean, you know what it's like, Dan. How many times they say, well, I got myself an LX 10, 12 inch. Now I got my camera, put the camera on it, and I go, well, you bought it initially for visual, right? You didn't determine what the image scale is going to be now when you put that little ZWO 2600 on there.
Of course. That's because they do a lot at one time.
Exactly.
False expectations or incorrect expectations.
And maybe that kind of comes back on us because that kind of separates the order takers from a technical sales consultant.
Right.
I mean, you have your customers that come to you because they trust your word.
Right.
I've had so many customers come in.
As well as you.
They always say, you know what, I had this guy at Brand X that said I need this, and this. Well, did he tell you to do this calculation? No. Did he tell you to do this calculation? Well, let's go through the calculation, then we're going to educate you. So they trust your judgment, and now they know that they're going to come back to you because you're going to lead them down that path. And you're absolutely right. I always tell people is that, you know what, ask somebody who you're working with to show you images that they've taken because they've been where you're going to get into. So that way then you can always use them as a technical resource.
Yeah, I do think they do have a lot of false expectations.
Yeah.
I was watching a video that Simon recently did where he was talking about driving cars. It takes time to learn to drive a car. And I do feel a lot of colors and a lot of technology is thrown in at one time, and it can be overwhelming to try and do it because they want to see those colors badly, And I get it. I get it. They're excited,
I think maybe this is kind of maybe the human nature is that as human beings, are we impatient? There has to be.
It seems to me like we're becoming more and more impatient.
I think so. especially driving on the 14, right?
Yeah, I find myself impatient at times.
Yeah, because this is truly a hobby that you just can't be impatient with. You literally have to take your time and understand your equipment and understand the nuances of explaining what Fletcher is.
Sorry, keep going, but just find a way to transition and just stop, okay? So just start from what you were just saying.
Okay, once again, trying to talk to somebody about, do you know what Fletcher is and why Fletcher is so important? So once again, it's the ability to understand, you got to take the time to learn what you're getting yourself into.
Right.
And that does take a little bit of time.
In defense of the newcomers, the astro-imagers in particular, during the time I had started in the 90s, early 90s, there wasn't anywhere remotely as much selection. And it was actually a blessing in disguise because I had no choice but to understand the basic stuff because there wasn't a lot available anyway. And it just helped cultivate slowly over a period of time. But now, beginners are just throwing a lot of things at one time. So it's like, in their defense, what are they going to do? They don't know,
And let's be brutally honest. People go to cloudy nights.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of information, good, bad, and indifferent that you're going to get.
It's true, man. Somebody said that about go online and research the crap out of me. And I said, no, it's sometimes too much information, man.
Exactly.
Right? And some of it might not be good information, but yeah, so.